The year is 1971. New York City is one of the most dangerous cities in the world. During this year, the crime index rises above 5,000. That's 22% higher than the national average. Over 145,000 violent crimes are reported, one every 9 minutes. And there are about 5 murders every single day. 12 police officers will lose their lives in the line of duty.
In October, a little-known cop named Frank Serpico will make national headlines by exposing widespread corruption in the police department. So when another New York cop named George Johnson is called on to make an arrest in Times Square, he's entering a highly charged environment. Crime is at an all-time high. Respect for the police is at an all-time low. And unbeknownst to Johnson, the suspect, who's been caught rifling through coats looking for money, is a wanted criminal with a history of violence against police officers.
Here's where the story gets really interesting. Instead of calling for a police van to take the suspect in custody, Officer Johnson just asked the guy to walk back to the station with him. It's 10 blocks away. And the guy does it, even though he has to know he's wanted on other charges. So they walk along, smoking cigarettes and chatting like old pals for maybe 15 minutes. When they get to the station, the man gets booked into custody. Other officers are amazed. They ask Johnson how he managed to get this guy to come along willingly. Johnson tells him it was simple. It was because he had treated the man with respect.
You're probably not a cop, and of course, the story isn't really about crime, it's about leadership. It's about what happens when you treat people the way you like to be treated. Most people don't face the threat of physical violence at work, but as a leader, chances are good that you'll face a hostile audience at some point. Maybe you're a new boss in a unit that's been in a free fall, or maybe you're leading a team that feels impossible to motivate. In those situations, it's tempting to power up. You may not have a nightstick, but you do have authority. You may not be aware of it, but there's a huge power differential between you and your employees. You can cancel vacations, you can demand overtime or withhold bonuses. You can even fire people.
When things get tough, it's easy to reach for the power tools. Sure, there are times when a leader must hold people accountable to policies and the like, but at the end of the day, leaders want performance, not merely compliance. It can be tempting to use fear as a motivator. But is that the best way to get results? What if there were a better way to inspire your team to top performance? What if believing the best about your team and acting on the best in them really is the best way to motivate them? Hi, I'm Micheal Hyatt.
And I'm Megan Hyatt. So we've used a pretty heavy word in the opening, and that's fear.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I don't really think most leaders see themselves as using authoritarian tactics or motivating by fear. Do you?
No, I don't. And unfortunately, the ones that use it are often tragically self-unaware.
Right.
Right? But sometimes we can slip into fear-based leadership without even realizing it. For example, less experienced leaders sometimes lack confidence, and they feel the need to protect their authority. So they can get defensive, or they can set up unhealthy power dynamics like using threats to motivate people, even without realizing they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Shutting down pushback. They don't want any dissent, anybody, contradicting them, or relying on positional authority, not earned respect.
Yep.
But mature leaders, on the other hand, have learned to use gentle power, influence gained through building trust, or the power of their vision.
Yeah.
Or just creating alignment in the team or coaching, but being for the other person and not standing against the other person.
Right.
Second, a lot of leaders aren't aware of the power differential with their subordinates. And this is one that's tough. I've been largely unaware of this for most of my career. I just kind of consider us, a team of colleagues, and we're all in this together. We're peers. But the truth is, when you are in a position to supervise others, every one of your words weighs 1,000 pounds.
Yeah, that's really true.
People parse it. They inject meaning into it. Even your hints about negative consequences have a resounding effect.
Yep.
Third, the more pressure we feel, the easier it is to power up.
Right.
Maybe it's our boss who's putting the power on us, or the board that's putting the power on us. And we can translate that without even thinking about it. So facial expressions.
This is a big one, by the way.
It is.
It's the nonverbal cues that it's like they're talking to our primitive brain, which is why they can conjure up fear.
Yeah. Well, and I've been asked before, am I mad? And I've said no.
Right.
And I did this with an executive coach. And I wasn't mad. It's just that somehow I didn't get the message to my face. And I was just focused. But
a
you
real
have
problem.
to be self-aware. It
Right.
is. So when you're having a bad day, everybody knows it. I worked for a guy one time who, before we would go to his office, we would whisper to his assistant, "How's the weather?"
Ugh.
And by that, we meant, is he having a bad day or a good day? Because
Right.
if it was a bad day, I don't want to make this pitch for this proposal. I'll come back another day. Also, when our superiors resort to or else language, we're naturally going to pass it on. We're going to feel the pinch. And what happens is everybody starts tiptoeing around us, or we start tiptoeing around our boss that's acting like that, but you feel like you're walking on eggshells.
Right.
Fourth, and I think we got to acknowledge this, fear works.
Yep.
Up to a point.
Just not for very long.
Not for very long. The news media has figured out that fear is an incredible motivator. It keeps us glued to our televisions, engaged in what's happening. Have you ever noticed, by the way, how often there's breaking news or a breaking alert? It's like, really? I mean, it's the least. I'm serious. On some channels, it's 2-3 times an hour.
Right.
Breaking news.
I think you could probably just go ahead and list on one hand the ones that don't do that, right?
Even the weather people do it now. Motivated by fear.
Yeah, if you live in the state of Tennessee, the threat of, snowpocalypse is huge, but never materializes.
So a reporter friend of mine told me that the producer would start the production meeting in the morning by saying, "Who's got something scary?"
Oh, yikes.
And they say if it bleeds, it leads. Right? So if it's a scary story, that's what's going to garner the headline. And people do respond to fear, at least in the short term.
The problem is that as a leader, you're never going to get people's creative thinking, their innovation, or their best contribution if they're also scared, because those are two totally different parts of your brain, and you can't be in both at the same time.
That's right.
So there's some interesting research on this point. Researchers have identified the power paradox, which means that people in power tend to have a decreased sense of empathy toward others. That's a cautionary
scary
bit of information. One of the reasons for this is actually neurological. We all have innate brain wiring that makes us feel compassion toward others, but feeling stress, anxiety, anger, and fear degrade the brain's ability to feel empathy. So I think it stands to reason that if you're a leader, you're probably feeling those feelings more often. So this is a higher risk for you. So if you feel stressed out, especially for an extended period of time, you can tend to be less compassionate, which is something we need to be really on guard for. And is part of the reason why rejuvenation as a leader is so important, because if you're burnout, that's going to be, a ripple effect with your team that is really problematic.
Well, it's kind of a good reminder again that our leadership is contagious.
Right.
When we're manifesting more of a positive spirit and a can-do attitude, that can be contagious. But when we're in fear or survival, that can also be contagious. In fact, I would say it's even worse than that. People are going to get the disease worse than we have it.
Yes.
It gets amplified.
That
as it moves
amplification.
down. Yeah. Okay, so respect is a far better motivator than fear. And 4 reasons here quickly. First, fear produces behavioral compliance, but it degrades self-motivation. In other words, it moves the motivation from something internal to something external. A study of rats showed that the fear of pain is very useful in introducing behavioral change, because rats will do almost anything to avoid electric shock. And by the way, people will too.
Right.
But a study of university students showed that when teachers use threats or fear of failing as a motivating tactic, it erodes their self-motivation. And as a result, they actually performed worse on tests. People had less of a sense of agency, less confidence, and it influenced their behavior. Second, internal motivations are always stronger than external ones.
Yeah, we know this from our goal setting research.
We do, and it's included in your best year ever and the course and everything else. But interestingly, researchers found that fear motivation works best on people with lower self-esteem. They're afraid to fail. In other words, they're easier to manipulate.
Right.
Which is a scary thing if you're in a position of leadership.
Right.
You never want to resort to manipulation. But people with a higher sense of self-worth were more motivated by goal achievement, which is what you want, right?
Right.
If you're leading an organization. Third, respect is consistently shown to be the most effective motivator. For example, a study of healthcare workers in developing countries showed they didn't always do a great job because they were unmotivated. Interestingly, social status was their top motivator. So when they felt valued and respected by the community for the work they did, guess what? They performed better. Fourth, workplaces with a positive culture are healthy. Literally. According to Harvard Business Review, healthcare expenditures at high-pressure companies are nearly 50% greater than at other organizations. Wow. Not really surprising, but in a study of over 3,000 employees, results showed a strong link between leadership behavior and heart disease.
Wow.
So a bad boss can actually kill you.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, so the real question is this. And heart disease.
Wow.
So a bad boss can actually kill you.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, so the real question is this. Do I want short-term results at any cost, or do I want to build a team that'll perform well for the long haul?
Most of us don't want to be perceived as scary bosses, but it's easy to slip into using power tactics. But the research is clear that respect is a far better long-term motivator than fear. So we've identified 3 tools for creating long-term motivation in your team. Dad, what's the first one?
The first one is simple courtesy. So just treat other people as you'd like to be treated. I mean, didn't your mom tell you this?
Right. Something we've kind of lost, though, in our culture.
We have definitely lost that because our culture has become more uncivil and more coarse.
Yes.
But some examples of this would be in terms of behaving with consideration for others, tact, punctuality, listening, not talking over the top of people, eye contact, introducing others, like when you walk into a room and you don't know the people, taking the initiative to introduce yourself. This is treating others with respect in casual ways, but this shows respect to others. It says, I acknowledge your value and I won't ignore you. I see you.
We can't underestimate these small, often nonverbal kind of cues that we're giving to people, because if we're consistently late, if we don't keep confidences, if we don't listen well and we talk over the top of people, if we don't make eye contact, all these kind of things, it really communicates a level of disrespect for people that does not go unnoticed.
It does. And the opposite of this is rudeness.
Right.
Which is totally self-centered. We're focused on ourselves. We're lost in our own world, caught up in our head. We're not paying attention to the people that are around us. We may be short with people. But if you want to witness this really full on, just go to an airport and be somewhere where a flight just got canceled.
Yeah. That brings out the worst in people.
Oh, it brings out the worst in people. And sometimes I just sit there going, oh my gosh, what is it about your life that makes you so crazy that the flight was canceled? Like I hate that as well as much as the next guy. But it's not the end of the world. You're not going to remember it a week from now. There may be some crazy circumstances where that's the case. But for people to go nuts, go nuclear in a situation like that. Plus, and here's where the motivation side of this works. When you treat the person who's trying to help you find another airplane, when you treat that person with respect and dignity and kindness and grace, then all of a sudden you stand in such stark contrast to everybody else that they're more than happy to help you. I've had that happen so many times. So when people feel respected, they're more collaborative, they're more energetic, they're more productive.
Interestingly, according to Harvard Business Review, half of employees don't feel respected by their boss. Can you believe
tragic.
That? Isn't that tragic? But when employees do feel respected by their leaders, the payoff is huge. First of all, they reported 56% better health and well-being, 89% greater enjoyment and satisfaction with their jobs, and 92% greater focus. And they had greatly increased levels of meaning and significance. And what we know about employee retention would tell us that's very important.
Yeah, it is. I want to say a special word about incivility, because I think that something has happened in our culture. And I started witnessing this in the 2008 election, but I think it's gotten progressively worse.
Yeah.
And it's worse on both sides. So it's not like you can just point to one political party. It's kind of just the modus operandi for every party now and for everybody that's on a news show. Even the news shows have deteriorated to the point where it's just yelling, shouting, talking over the top of each other. But one of the things that I think is scary, and one of the things we have to be careful of as a leader with regard to incivility, is that we can become like those that we oppose. So social media has made this worse. And so I frequently see, and you probably frequently see too, people resorting to dehumanizing language to characterize somebody else who is using dehumanizing language, and they become guilty of the very same thing that they're accusing the other party of being.
Absolutely.
And so somebody's got to break the cycle. One of the best books I read this last year was a book on nonviolent communication. And just the necessity of kind of taking the high road and not responding in kind when somebody insults us, somebody's disrespectful, but trying to put the pause between that action and our response, and taking the higher ground and responding with grace. Well,
if we're going to change kind of the chemistry or the charge of the situation, we have to do something differently. In a positive way. We can't just respond in kind, or it won't get any better.
Well, and that's what happens on social media so often in these kind of debates that go on. Each side is yelling, nobody's listening, and nobody's going to change their behavior on the other side of the argument. Not until somebody finally listens and the other side feels heard.
And that's why we have to set the tone as leaders in our own companies.
Right.
It's really critical. Okay, Dad, so I have a question for you.
Okay.
What is your biggest pet peeve regarding courtesy in the workplace?
I don't know why this is my pet peeve, but it is. But it's when people talk over the top of each other.
Yeah.
So that you're trying to have a discussion and some people get excited. And instead of actually listening or waiting for the other person to finish, they talk right over the top of it. In fact, and I've been guilty of this too. So it's not like, I have a clean slate on this. But the other thing that happens sometimes is somebody is thinking of what they're going to say and not actually listening to what the other person is saying.
Right.
But I just think it's rude. What about you? Do you have one?
I'm kind of with you on that. First of all, I hate people talking over other people, but I would say, I think the eye contact thing is big. I would say this is kind of a little version of that, which is people being distracted in meetings, not being present. So not making eye contact, doing other work while they're supposed to be in a conversation with you. They're on their phone or they're on their computer, that kind of stuff. I think it just, first of all, it's tempting for all of us because we always have all kinds of things going on while we're in a meeting. But it communicates that someone else is more important than the person you're with.
Yeah.
And I think that's unintentionally, in most cases, very rude.
Well, I remember reading years ago that John Kennedy, the president, had this amazing ability to make you feel like you were the only person in the room. Yeah. That he had this eye contact. And Bill, I think that's a real gift and something that doesn't cost leaders anything. And something that they can employ more often is to really look at people so that people feel seen. Yep. And there's a connection that happens in that builds trust. I mean, it's a really practical thing. And I'm not talking about, using it to manipulate people, but using it to just be genuine in seeing that other person.
I think that's kind of what we're talking about here with respect. I see you and you matter.
Before we move on, let's talk about the new webinar we have in the works. It's called The Busy Person's Guide to Achieving More Without Feeling Overwhelmed. Now, you're probably scratching your head at that title. You don't know if it's possible to get more done without pushing yourself to the limit. You're probably working on weekends just to get ahead of your work. Or you're probably working overtime every day because you can't seem to finish those big, revenue-producing, time-intensive projects. You're piling on more work because you feel that overwhelm and achievement go hand in hand. Well, in this free webinar, I break down this myth. In fact, I show you 5 proven methods to get ahead of your work without sacrificing free time. Now, I'll be holding this webinar at a number of different dates and times this week and next, and these webinars will fill up fast. So if you want to reserve your seat for this special teaching, then sign up today at freetofocus.com/achieve. And as always, this webinar is free.
So the first tool for creating long-term motivation is a little common courtesy, and that goes a long way in making your team feel valued. But what's tool number 2?
The second tool is candor. Say what you mean and mean what you say. So candor, if we define it broadly, is being open and honest in our speech and our conduct. So for example, here's what it's not. It's not flattering people because that's not candor, right?
Yep.
It's a subtle form of manipulation, sometimes not so subtle. Not withholding information. We've all known people like that, especially in the corporate world, that are just very much keeping their facts and their contacts and everything else close to their vest. Not playing favorites, not concealing your true intentions. But as a leader, it doesn't mean you have to tell everything you know, but what you do say has to be true. And kind of my rule on this is I don't want to round up numbers to create an impression or make things appear better than they are. And I think it's easy to do that, not only by what you say, but by what you leave out if you're not careful.
Yeah. And people will catch you. If you're a leader,
that's right.
Your team knows the truth and they know if there's a gap between what you've said and the truth. And that nothing will create cynicism like that.
Isn't it interesting that so many leaders today try to get away with stuff?
Oh my
like
gosh.
that?
You just want to smack them upside the head.
They just go, really? I mean, how do you think you're going to get away with this?
Right. It's so true.
The other records, people are going to speak out.
Right. Well, so the other part of this, though, I think when we're talking about candor is the willingness to speak into the lives or the performance of your team members. Yeah. And depending on your personality, this can be tough for you as a leader. Maybe you'd like to avoid conflict, or, you're just kind of uncertain, or you lack confidence in these situations. But if your people are going to grow, you have to be candid with them about their performance. You have to be willing to give them constructive feedback in obviously a non-abusive way. I mean, constructive is the operative word there, but it's critical that you tell them if something's not going well. You don't want to wait for HR to handle it, or you don't want to kind of hide out until their annual review. You want to deal with things in real time so they have the opportunity to improve, which creates an environment of trust. And I think you've said to me before, when you do that, you're really standing for the best of that person, which I know we're going to talk about more in a minute. But I think, you're assuming that they can handle it, that they're not weak.
That's right.
And
I think there's sort of this underlying assumption when we're dealing with people, and the reason we don't have candors, we think, well, they can't handle this.
Right.
They can't handle the truth. I can't really speak the truth.
Yeah.
They're fragile.
Right.
They're going to fall apart.
And it's my job as a leader to protect them.
Right.
Which is...
And it's a sort of a backwards lack of respect.
It is.
Right? Because what I want to be able to say is, you know what, I respect you enough that you're able to handle this, so let me just tell you the truth.
Yep. You can communicate that with dignity and respect and honor, but it's important to be direct.
And I'll tell you why that's important is because, and I've often said, the shortest distance between where you are and where you want to be is the truth.
Yes.
So the faster you can get to the truth,
yep.
And if it's somebody's performance, if it's, the company's performance, whatever it is, the more you can be candid and truthful about that, the sooner people will be enrolled to help correct the problem.
All right. Tool number 1 in creating long-term motivation with your team is courtesy. Tool number 2 is candor. And that brings us to tool number 3.
Tool number 3 is challenge. And it's a little bit like candor in that the reason we don't challenge people is because we believe they can't handle it. Or maybe we assume that they're performing at their best. So I heard a story years ago about Dr. Henry Kissinger, who was kind of known to have high standards and be exacting, and had a speechwriter who was working with him. And the speechwriter prepared a speech, had worked on it really hard because he knew this was important, and he knew Dr. Kissinger was so exacting. And he submitted the speech to him. And like the next day, he gets the speech back with a handwritten note on it that said, "I think you can do better."
Oh.
Well, he was mortified when he got that. He thought, whoa, am I about to be fired? What's going to happen here? So, he rolled up his sleeves. He went back to work on the speech, completely retooled it, added a bunch of research, some more compelling stories. Great job. Turned it into Kissinger. And the next day gets a note back from Kissinger and says, "I still think you can do better."
Wow. It's gutsy.
And so now the guy is thinking, what more can I do? And so he's working super hard on this speech. Again, retools it, takes it to the next level. And he sends the note with the speech to Dr. Kissinger. And he said, "Dr. Kissinger," he said, I sure hope this is acceptable, because honestly, this is the very, very best I can do. I cannot do better than this. And Dr. Kissinger sent a note back and he said, "Good, this time I'll read it."
Wow. Man, that takes guts. I'm thinking he's done that before.
I think he has too. So I don't even know if that story is true, but it's obviously an extreme example of challenging people. Yeah, good example of this. If you think back about the teachers that you remember, like I had, I don't know, a couple dozen grade school and junior high and high school teachers.
Yep.
I really can't remember many of their names.
Right.
But the one name that I remember is Mr. Colthorpe, who was my English teacher, because he had, it seemed at the time, unbelievably high standards. He expected us to memorize in Middle English this part of Chaucer.
Okay, do you know it?
I do, but I'm not going to do it. Won that opera with the short of sota. That's
See, I
remember.
do it. Okay.
Yeah, and so he was so tough on us, but he held us accountable, and he called us to a higher standard. And when I think back through the bosses that I worked through, there were some that were just jerks. Those didn't motivate me at all. But the ones that believed I could do better, and I could think back of coaches who worked with me who said, "You know what? You can do better. You're selling yourself short."
Right.
And I can think of a speech coach in particular that did that. So again, I think by challenging people, we communicate a subtle sort of respect that says subliminally, you're capable.
I think it's even more than respect. I think it's belief. I think
that's a fair point.
I think what you're doing in that moment is you're communicating that you see something in them that they don't see in themselves, and you wouldn't ask them to do it if you didn't think they could.
Well, and the opposite of this and where it gets disrespectful is when we delegate or we don't delegate because we think they can't do it.
Right.
So we don't give our executive assistant that task because we think, if I want to do it, get it done right, I got to do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
That's disrespectful.
Right.
That person will never rise to the challenge until they're given the opportunity.
Yep.
I'm going to say that again. They will never rise to the challenge until they're given the opportunity. Your job as a leader is to give them the opportunity and give them the opportunity to rise to the challenge.
Yeah.
Then you can coach them. What I've discovered, and we've seen this in our company like crazy, is that people do it better than we could have imagined it.
Right.
Because they have different capabilities, different giftings. They see things from a different point of view. So again, challenging people is a way to respect them and bring their performance up to the next level.
And this is a place where, as a leader, it's really important to be self-aware, because I think if you're a leader who struggles with people pleasing, or something like that, it may be difficult for you to create a situation that makes your team members or your direct reports uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But discomfort is not the same as disrespect. And when you challenge somebody, they will probably feel uncomfortable. You may feel uncomfortable, but that actually may be indicative that you're on the right course and you're actually for them and you're helping them, rather than just sort of creating an environment of comfort, which doesn't produce results.
Well, and I've kind of done this with you, right? Like especially with regard to public speaking.
Right. Totally.
Or financial management in the company.
Yep.
I mean, I've thrown you in the deep end on that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Why? Because I believe you're capable. I respect you, and I believe, to your point, it's more than respect, it's a belief.
Yep.
And you've exceeded my expectations every time.
So far, it's going okay.
Yeah, that's right. So far, so good.
So just to be practical for a second, if this is a new idea for you, this concept of challenging your team members, how could you practically integrate this into your leadership?
A couple ways. One that's simple is as a part of your annual review process. Ask yourself the question, what could I challenge this person to do that they're not now doing? In other words, we talk about looking for opportunities for improvement, which is usually kind of a euphemism for we're going to focus on their weaknesses and hope we can tweak them up. Mm-hmm. No, forget that. That's rarely worth the effort. What you can do, though, is say, what are their strengths? What are the capabilities? And how can I provide for them an opportunity where they can express that and grow?
Right.
Another thing, too, is to look at your to-do list and consider the things that heretofore you never would have considered delegating, and delegate those things. Whether they're preparing a report, preparing a speech, running a project, whatever it is. Forget the person's title, but give them an opportunity to really shine and to take that on. Resource them, instruct them, coach them, give them whatever they need to succeed. But you'll win. Both of you will win in that kind of context. Mm-hmm. You'll win because you get it off your to-do list, which is already too long.
Right.
They'll win because they have an opportunity to grow and develop and become more useful to your organization.
Today, we've learned that the very best way to motivate your team is by believing the best about them. And we've also shared 3 tools for creating long-term motivation, which are courtesy,